The price tag read $0.69. Winter stared at it. White numbers on red plastic, faded from years of fluorescent light, as if it held the answer to a question she couldn't remember asking. Her thumb traced the cellophane wrapper of the bread loaf, leaving a rust-colored smear across the cartoon wheat stalks printed on the package. The blood had dried tacky on her fingers, pulling at the whorls of her fingerprints when she moved. She didn't move much. Miller's roadside diner occupied the gray space between highway rest stop and local institution, its parking lot, cracked asphalt, and good intentions. The attached convenience store smelled like coffee that had been burning since the Carter administration, hot dogs rotating on greasy rollers, and the particular species of commercial cleaning product that never quite masked what it was meant to clean. 3 overhead lights hummed their fluorescent hymn. One flickered, casting epileptic shadows across aisles of road snacks and trucker speed. Winter stood at the register with the stillness of a trapped animal, the kind that stopped struggling not from acceptance, but from the bone-deep knowledge that movement draws the predator's eye. Behind the counter, Frank Mitchell had worked this register for 17 years and considered himself unshockable. He'd sold cigarettes to teenagers with fake IDs, so bad they looked like ransom notes, processed transactions for lot lizards and their bleary clientele, and once sold a case of beer to a man who'd robbed a liquor store 3 towns over just the night before. Frank had a policy: take the money, make the change, mind his business. But the girl's hands shook as she placed the bills on the counter. And the bills were wrong. Not counterfeit. Wrong. The $20 bill looked like it had been used to staunch a wound. Dark stains, brown at the edges where they'd dried, still tacky red at the center, covered Jackson's face. The other bills, 1s and 5s, were crumpled tight, as if she'd been clutching them in a fist for hours. Dirt under the bloodstains, or something like dirt. Frank's eyes traveled from the money to the girl's hands, scratched, bruised at the knuckles, more blood under the nails, then to her face. She was maybe 19, maybe 25. Trauma aged people in strange ways, made the math unreliable. Dirty blonde hair tangled with bits of forest debris, leaves, a small twig, what might have been pine needles, a face that might have been pretty underneath the grime and exhaustion, but it was her eyes that stopped Frank's prepared speech about calling the police. Empty. Not vacant, not shocked. Empty, like someone had reached in and scooped out everything that made a person, left only the biological imperative to keep breathing. Frank had seen a lot. He'd never seen that. Just the bread? His voice came out gentler than he'd intended. Winter nodded. The movement seemed to take effort. That's going to be 74 cents. Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, but precise. With tax. She'd done the math. Despite everything else, whatever else, she'd done the math. Frank reached for the blood-stained 20, and his hand hesitated. From the corner booth, the one truckers knew to avoid because it's where the Iron Hounds always sat when they rolled through, Jeremy Stanley watched the transaction unfold with the attention of a man who'd made a career of reading the things people didn't say. The Iron Hounds weren't the largest MC, but they were particular, precise. They didn't deal in the usual biker bullshit, meth labs and protection rackets. They dealt in debts, the kind that couldn't be reported to police because the police wouldn't care or couldn't help. They found people who didn't want to be found. They settled scores that the law had decided weren't worth settling. Jeremy, though most called him Ghost for reasons that varied depending on who told the story, was 42 and looked older in the right light. younger in others. 6'3", lean in the way of men who forgot to eat when working, with graying temples that he refused to dye and ink, covering both arms in a roadmap of personal history he never explained. The scar bisecting his left eyebrow was from a bottle. The one on his jaw was from love. He didn't specify which had hurt worse. Next to him, Gage, his VP and oldest friend, nursed black coffee and tracked the girl with professional interest. She's gonna bolt. No. Jeremy's voice was quiet, certain. She doesn't have anywhere to bolt to. Across the table, Dutch and Finn were arguing about carburetor specs in the shorthand of men who'd had the same argument 1,000 times. Knox, the youngest at 26, was demolishing a plate of eggs while scrolling his phone, but his knee bounced under the table, to tell that he was paying attention to everything. Jeremy had noticed the girl the moment she'd pushed through the door, moving with the careful deliberation of someone navigating the world through layers of cotton and static. He'd cataloged the details automatically. Clothes torn and dirty, one shoe missing its lace, blood, not fresh but not old enough to flake, on her hands, her jaw, soaked into the collar of her shirt. Bad night. Bad week. Bad life. Maybe. He'd seen 100 versions of this girl in 100 roadside stops. Would have written her off as another runaway, another bad luck story, another statistic that social services would shuffle into the wrong folder. But then she'd turn toward the light, reaching for the bread, and Jeremy had seen her eyes. The hunter's mark. That's what his sister had called it, back when they were kids and she still talked to him about the things she saw in people. Before she'd disappeared and left him with nothing but a police report that went cold and the particular hell of not knowing. Lily had been 14, 23 years ago, this October. She told him once that some people carried their trauma on the outside, scars, nervous tics, the loud brokenness everyone could see. But others, she'd said, carried it deeper. So deep it changed something fundamental, left a mark that only showed in the eyes. Like they've been hunted, she'd said, and they know the hunter's still out there. Jeremy had dismissed it as teenage melodrama. Then Lily vanished from her bedroom on a Tuesday night, window open, no signs of struggle. Gone as if she'd never existed except for the hole she left in their family. He'd spent 2 decades looking for that mark in every face he passed, wondering if he'd see it in Lily when, if, he found her. Now he saw it in this girl, sharp and clear as a brand. Frank's wisdom. Break. Frank's been working that register for 17 years, and you know what he's learned? Always take what's valuable when it's offered. So here's the deal. Drop your location in the comments. Frank's collecting data for his weirdest customers map. And subscribe to this channel before you forget. Because Chapter 2 is coming in hot. And when you find out what Winter's really running from, you'll be glad you're already subscribed and ready. Frank guarantees it. He also guarantees the coffee's terrible, but that's unrelated. The moment stretched. Frank still hadn't touched the money. The girl stood frozen, and Jeremy could see her starting to fracture, the tremor moving from her hands to her shoulders, the breath catching in her chest. Gage. Jeremy slid out of the booth, coffee abandoned. Stay put. He crossed the distance to the register in 4 strides, his boots silent on the cracked linoleum. And when he spoke, his voice was low and commanded in its quietness, the tone that made men with twice his experience shut up and listen. Frank, I've got this. Frank's relief was palpable. He stepped back. Jeremy didn't reach for the money, didn't reach for the girl. He simply positioned himself between her and the door. And when she finally looked up at him, really looked, her eyes focusing through whatever fog she was navigating. He saw the moment she recognized what he was. Not a threat. Not safety either. Something else. Something that understood. "Come on," Jeremy said, nodding toward the back counter where the coffee station offered a semblance of privacy. "Let's get you something more than bread." Winter's fingers tightened on the loaf. "I can pay." "I know you can." Jeremy kept his voice level, his body language open, non-threatening. "But you're going to sit down first. Then we'll worry about the money." For a long moment, she didn't move. Every muscle was coiled, ready for fight or flight, trapped in the horrible paralysis of having no good options. Then, slowly, she took one step toward the back counter. Jeremy followed, careful to keep distance between them, and wondered what the hell he was doing, and why the sight of the stranger's eyes made his chest tight with a grief he'd learned to bury years ago. The back corner of Miller's Diner existed in perpetual twilight, too far from the windows to catch natural light, too close to the kitchen to escape the smell of old grease and industrial detergent. A coffee station sat against the wall, next to a rack of travel mugs nobody ever bought, and a tip jar that had contained the same $3 for the past 6 months. Winter positioned herself with her back to the wall, the bread loaf still clutched against her chest like a talisman. She tracked Jeremy's movements with the hypervigilance of prey, her body angled toward the exit, despite having followed him here voluntarily. Jeremy knew better than to crowd her. He stopped a careful 6 feet away, leaning against the counter with deliberate casualness, and poured 2 cups of Frank's terrible coffee. He pushed one across the counter toward her, close enough to reach but far enough that she'd have to make the choice to take it. She didn't. "You don't want help," Jeremy said. It wasn't a question. Winter's jaw tightened. "I want to pay for the bread and leave. With the bloody 20. It spends the same. Does it?" Jeremy took a sip of coffee, grimaced at the taste, and set the cup down. "Because from where I'm standing, that money's got a story attached to it, and stories like that tend to follow people." Her fingers dug into the cellophane. "Not your problem." "Maybe not." Jeremy's voice stayed level, conversational. "But you walked into this diner instead of the 20 others between here and wherever you came from. You picked the one with the old register that doesn't have cameras. The one where the guy behind the counter looks like he stopped giving a damn about other people's business around the Clinton administration. That's not coincidence. That's calculation." Winter said nothing, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, that she'd been read. "So here's what I think," Jeremy continued. "I think you needed somewhere to stop. Somewhere safe just for a minute. Somewhere to breathe." He paused. "I also think you're about 5 seconds from running, and whatever you're running from is bad enough that you'd rather take your chances out there than accept help from a stranger. I don't need help. Everyone needs help." Jeremy's tone shifted, something harder underneath the conversational veneer. "Question is whether you're too proud or too scared to take it." "I'm not scared," but her voice cracked on the word, betraying her. Jeremy straightened, and despite keeping his distance, his presence seemed to fill the space. "Listen to me very carefully. I don't know what happened to you. I don't know whose blood that is, or where you came from, or what you did to survive. But I know that look in your eyes. I've spent 23 years looking for it." Winter's breath hitched. "What?" "My sister." The words came out rough, like they scraped his throat on the way up. "Lily. She disappeared when she was 14. No signs, no suspects, no body. Just gone. And every day since, I've wondered if she was out there somewhere, looking like you look right now, desperate and alone and trying to survive something nobody should have to survive. He took a step closer. Winter tensed but didn't bolt. So when I see someone with that look, I help. Not because I'm a good person. I'm not. Not because I think it'll bring Lily back. It won't. I help because maybe, somewhere, someone's helping her. And maybe that's the only thing keeping the universe from being completely fucking meaningless. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the hum of the dying fluorescent lights and the distant clatter from the kitchen. "The police," Winter started. "No police." Jeremy's voice was iron. "I promise you, on my sister's memory, on everything I have left to lose, no police. Only us. Us?" Jeremy gestured toward the booth where the Iron Hounds sat, all of them now openly watching the exchange. "Them. Me. We handle our own problems, and sometimes we handle other people's problems when the law won't or can't. You want help? You've got it. You want to walk out that door? I won't stop you." He paused. "But if you walk alone. And something tells me you can't afford alone right now." Winter's composure cracked. Not all at once. It came in pieces, like ice breaking on a frozen lake. Her shoulders sagged. The bread loaf slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud. And when she looked up at Jeremy, her eyes were raw with a desperation that made his chest ache. "I didn't escape for me." The words came out barely above a whisper. Jeremy went still. "What?" "My sister, Sky." Winter's voice gained strength, even as the tears started tracking through the grime on her face. "She's 17. She's still there. I couldn't get her out. I had to leave her behind to get help. But if I go to the police, he'll know. He always knows. He has people everywhere. Cops, social workers, judges. The last girl who tried to report him disappeared the next day. They found her 3 weeks later, in pieces." Jeremy's hands curled into fists. "Who?" "They call him the Collector." The name came out like poison. "He takes girls, keeps them. The quarry house, 15 miles north of Ashford, that's where he holds them. Sky's been there for 8 months. I've been there for 2 years. I only got out because..." She swallowed hard. "Because I did things I can't take back." The blood on her hands suddenly made terrible sense. "Sky," Jeremy repeated, committing the name to memory. 17, Quarry House, the Collector. He looked toward the booth, caught Gage's eye, and nodded once. Gage's expression hardened, understanding passing between them without words. "I can take you to..." "Jeremy." Gage's voice cut across the diner, low and urgent. He'd moved to the window, his posture deceptively casual, but his hand resting on his hip, where Jeremy knew he carried. "We've got a problem." Jeremy was across the space, in seconds. "What?" "Black sedan, no plates, drove past twice in the last 3 minutes, just parked across the street." Gage's jaw tightened. "And there's a guy, tall, suit, wrong for this area. He's just standing there, watching." Jeremy looked through the window. The sedan was sleek, expensive, too clean for a roadside diner parking lot. And the man... Winter appeared at his shoulder, and her sharp intake of breath confirmed what Jeremy already suspected. "Silas," she whispered. "He found me." The name hung in the air like a death sentence. Jeremy's mind moved through calculations with practiced speed. Exits, weapons, timing, angles. The Iron Hounds were already moving, Knox sliding toward the back door, Dutch and Finn bracketing the entrance. They'd done this dance before. "Frank." Jeremy's voice was quiet, but carried absolute authority. "Flip the sign." Frank didn't argue. He crossed to the door and turned the open sign to closed, pulling down the shade in a smooth, practiced motion that suggested this wasn't the first time Miller's Diner had needed to lock down. "How many does he have?" Jeremy asked Winter, his eyes still on the man across the street. "I don't know. He never comes alone. Best guess. 3, maybe 4. Her voice was steadier now, adrenaline overriding fear. "They'll come in fast. They'll want me alive, but they won't care about anyone else." Jeremy smiled, and it wasn't kind. "Then they're going to be disappointed on both counts." He turned to face his crew, and in that moment, Winter saw what the Iron Hounds really were. Not a motorcycle club playing at being dangerous, but something sharper, something honed by years of handling situations where the law looked the other way. "Gage, you're on the door. Knox, back exit. Dutch, Finn. Get the girl somewhere they can't see her from outside." Jeremy's orders came rapid fire, no hesitation. "Nobody moves until I give the word. And when this goes down, it goes down clean. We don't know who's watching." "Rules of engagement?" Gage asked. Jeremy looked at Winter, at the blood on her hands, at the desperation in her eyes, at the sister she'd left behind to get help from strangers who had no reason to care. He thought of Lily, 14 years old and gone. "We get the girl to safety," Jeremy said. "Then we go get her sister. Anyone standing in the way answers to me." Across the street, Silas pulled out a phone and made a call. The hunter had found his prey, but he hadn't counted on the prey finding wolves. The diner's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the scarred wooden table where Jeremy stood. 6 men surrounded him: Gage, Dutch, Finn, Knox, Frank, and 2 prospects whose names didn't matter yet. Outside, the neon sign flickered against the darkening sky, its pink glow painting the parking lot in shades of warning. Jeremy's phone lay face up on the table, the screen dark now, but the message still burned in his mind. Silas spotted. "Heading your direction. ETA 20 minutes. "Confirmation?" Gage asked, his voice low and controlled. "Reliable." Jeremy's jaw tightened. 2 separate sources. Silas is moving, and he's not alone. Dutch leaned forward, meaty forearms braced against the table. "How many?" 4 vehicles, maybe 10 men. Jeremy's eyes swept the circle, meeting each gaze in turn. This is him. The collector sent his top enforcer. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Finn's hand drifted toward the concealed weapon at his hip, an unconscious gesture that Jeremy caught and appreciated. These men understood what was coming. "Listen up." Jeremy's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "I need you to understand something. This isn't about recovering stolen property. This isn't about club business as usual." He paused, letting the weight settle. "My sister died because of what the collector does. She was 19 years old, and she's gone because men like Silas convinced her she was worthless, unless she destroyed herself for their profit." The words came harder than he expected, each syllable dragging pieces of old grief to the surface. But he pushed through because they needed to see this, needed to understand why he wouldn't back down, wouldn't negotiate, wouldn't show mercy. "Winter's just a kid," he continued. "Maybe she made mistakes. Maybe she stole from the wrong people. But I'll be damned if I let her end up like Melissa." His fist came down on the table, the impact rattling coffee mugs. "This isn't a run. This is war." Silence stretched between them, thick and charged. Then Gage nodded once, sharp, definitive. Dutch's hand formed a fist against the table in solidarity. Finn's expression hardened into something dangerous and certain. Knox cracked his knuckles, the sound like breaking bones. Frank, oldest and steadiest of them all, simply met Jeremy's eyes, and gave the barest incline of his head. No words needed. The commitment was absolute. Jeremy felt something shift in his chest, a solidifying of purpose, a recognition that he'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Good. Some lines were meant to be crossed. Defensive positions, he started to say. The front door exploded inward. 2 men entered, moving with the casual confidence of predators who'd never learned to fear. The first was tall and rail-thin, with a snake tattooed up his neck. The second was built like a concrete block, scarred knuckles already flexed. They wore street clothes, but the bulges under their jackets told the real story. Jeremy's hand moved toward his weapon, but Frank was already standing, positioning himself between the thugs and the rest of the group. The old mechanic's movements were unhurried, almost lazy, as he wiped his hands on a dish towel that had appeared from somewhere. "Help you, gentlemen?" Frank's voice carried the folksy warmth of someone discussing the weather. Snake Tattoo's eyes swept the room, cataloging faces, counting threats, looking for someone. Young woman, dark hair, maybe came through here earlier. Thief, stole from our employer. A lot of people come through. Frank ambled closer, putting himself squarely in their line of sight. Diner serves food, you know, kind of the whole deal. Don't play stupid, old man. Concrete Block took a step forward. We know she was here. We tracked her. Frank scratched his jaw thoughtfully, and Jeremy recognized the gesture. A signal? Gage and Dutch shifted almost imperceptibly, flanking positions. Knox's hand disappeared under the table. The prospects moved toward the kitchen entrance, blocking retreat. Oh, her! Frank snapped his fingers like he'd just remembered. Skinny thing, looked half-starved. Yeah, she was here. Tried to pay for pie with a sob story. He shook his head in mock disappointment. When that didn't work, she tried to lift cash from the register. Can you believe that? In broad daylight. Snake Tattoo exchanged a glance with his partner. Where is she now? Gone. Ran out the back about 30 minutes ago when I called her out. Frank gestured toward the rear exit. Headed east, I think. Or maybe north. Hard to tell. I was more concerned about checking the register, making sure she didn't actually get anything. It was a good story. Plausible. The kind of thing that happened every day in roadside diners. Jeremy watched the thugs process it, saw the doubt creeping in. You're lying. But Concrete Block's voice lacked conviction. Frank's expression hardened just slightly, enough to show steel beneath the folksy exterior. Son, I've been running this place for 30 years. I've seen every kind of thief, con artist, and lowlife you can imagine. That girl was small time, desperate, not worth whatever you're getting paid to chase her. The tension stretched. Jeremy's hand remained close to his weapon, ready. The hounds were coiled springs, waiting for his signal. Finally, Snake Tattoo stepped back. If you're lying, I'm not. Frank's smile didn't reach his eyes. But you're welcome to check the back lot if you want. Knock yourselves out. They left, but not before Snake Tattoo shot one last suspicious glance around the room. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like a countdown timer starting. 5 minutes, Jeremy said quietly. Maybe less before they realize we're full of shit. He turned toward the kitchen, toward the supply room where Winter waited, anxiety probably eating her alive. Time to move. Time to show the collector that some people couldn't be hunted without consequences. Time for war. The supply room smelled of industrial cleaner and decades-old grease. a cramped space lined with metal shelving units stacked with canned goods and napkin dispensers. Winter sat on an overturned milk crate, her knee bouncing rapidly, fingers twisted together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She looked up when Jeremy entered, hope and terror warring across her face. "We need to move now, right?" The words tumbled out too fast. "I can fight. I know I don't look like much, but I can shoot. I can..." "Stop." Jeremy's single word cut through her panic. He closed the door behind him, muffling the low voices from the main room, and crouched down so they were eye level. Close enough that she couldn't look away, couldn't retreat into the frantic spiral he recognized from 100 conversations with Melissa. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "You're not fighting. You're not running. You're doing something more important." Winter's laugh came out bitter. "What? Hiding? Being dead weight while you all..." "Intelligence officer." She blinked. "What?" "That's your new role." Jeremy pulled a folded napkin and pen from his pocket, set them on the crate beside her. "You lived in that house for weeks. You know things we can't know without you. Guard patterns, entry points, where they keep weapons, how many men Silas travels with, whether there are cameras, alarms, weak points in the structure." Understanding began to dawn in her eyes, pushing back some of the fear. "You're not helpless, Winter. You're the only advantage we have." He tapped the napkin. "I need you to draw me that house. Every detail you remember. Windows, doors, locks. Where did they keep you? Where does Silas sleep? What time do the guards change shifts?" Her hand reached for the pen, hesitated. I'm not sure I remember everything clearly. It was dark most of the time, and I was pretty out of it for the first few days. Whatever you remember. Start with the layout, just the shape of the building. We'll work from there." She began to draw, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. The lines were rough but purposeful. A rectangular main structure, a smaller addition on the east side, marks for windows and doors. Jeremy watched her transform before his eyes, the terrified victim receding as something steadier emerged. "There were always 2 guards outside," she said, pen moving faster now. "They switched every 6 hours, 6 a.m., noon, 6 p.m., midnight. The overnight guys were lazier. They'd smoke behind the shed, here." She marked an X on the crude map. "The quarry is about 50 yards past the house, mostly overgrown. There's a perimeter fence, but it's rusted through in places. I saw it when they moved me from the van." "Good. That's good." Jeremy studied the drawing, already calculating angles of approach, blind spots, tactical advantages. "What about inside?" "Main room when you enter. Living area, I guess. But there wasn't much furniture. Just a table, some chairs. They kept their weapons on the table at night." Her voice steadied as she talked, focusing on facts instead of fear. "Kitchen to the left, 2 bedrooms upstairs. They kept me in the basement. Stone walls, 1 small window up near the ceiling, faces north. The lock on the basement door was just a simple deadbolt. I could hear them slide it when they came down." She added more details, her handwriting cramped but legible in the margins. Jeremy watched the intelligence take shape, each notation a piece of the puzzle he'd need to bring his sister home. When she finally set the pen down, her hands were trembling again, but differently now. Adrenaline instead of terror. "This is good work," Jeremy said quietly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, heavy silver, worn smooth from years of wear, the Iron Hounds emblem raised in relief on its face, his father's ring, the Alpha seal. He pressed it into her palm, closed her fingers around it. What? Winter stared at the ring like it might burn her. A promise, Jeremy said. I'm coming back. And when I do, you're going to give that back to me. And we're going to figure out what comes next. Together. Her eyes were suddenly bright with unshed tears. You don't know that. You can't promise that. Jeremy, he's a monster. I've seen what he does to people. If you go after him, I know what he is. Jeremy's voice went hard, cold. I know exactly what men like him do. I watched my sister die because of them. I won't make that mistake again. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with old grief and new determination. A soft knock on the door. Finn's signal. Time to move, Jeremy said, standing. He helped Winter to her feet, steadied her when she swayed. Finn's going to take you to a safe house, couple counties over. It's quiet, secure. You'll wait there until this is done. And Sky? We're bringing her home tonight. Winter's hand tightened around the ring. What if something goes wrong? What if... Jeremy cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. Then Finn will make sure you're protected. But nothing's going wrong. We're the Iron Hounds. This is what we do. He opened the door. Finn stood in the hallway, leather jacket already on, keys in hand. The older hound gave Winter a reassuring nod. Steady, calm, the kind of presence that said nothing would touch her while he drew breath. One more thing, Jeremy said as Winter moved toward the door. She turned back, questioning. When you see Sky again, and you will, tell her something for me. What? Tell her the Alpha is coming. Winter nodded, something fierce and grateful breaking through her fear. Then she was following Finn down the hallway, toward the back exit, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Jeremy stood in the doorway and watched them go. Watched Finn's hand rest protectively on Winter's shoulder as they moved. Watched the back door close behind them. Watched headlights flare to life in the rear parking lot and then sweep away into the night. When they were gone, he turned back toward the main room. The hounds were waiting, transformed. Leather jackets bearing the club patches. Weapons checked and secured. Faces set in expressions Jeremy had seen before. The look men wore when they'd made peace with violence, when they'd accepted that some roads only led one direction. Gage caught his eye across the room, gave a single nod. Dutch cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp in the quiet. Knox checked the magazine in his sidearm one last time, then holstered it. Frank closed the diner's front blinds, flipped the sign to closed, locked the door. Jeremy pulled on his own jacket, felt the familiar weight settle across his shoulders. The Iron Hounds patch on his back, snarling wolf's head, crossed chains beneath, the word Alpha stitched above in silver thread. His father had worn this jacket, had built this club from nothing, had protected this territory, had taught Jeremy that some things were worth bleeding for. Tonight, Jeremy would prove he'd learned the lesson. Mount up, he said quietly. We ride in 5. The hounds moved toward the back exit in silence, boots heavy against worn linoleum. Outside, engines would roar to life. Chrome would gleam under streetlights. The road would stretch out before them, dark and unforgiving. Jeremy took one last look at the empty diner, at the table where Winter had drawn her map, at the door where the thugs had entered, at the space where his club had pledged themselves to war. Then he followed his brothers into the night. The quarry house was waiting. So was his sister. And God help anyone who stood in his way. The engines roared to life in perfect synchronization. 4 Harleys, their chrome catching the dying light like captured fire. Jeremy twisted the throttle, felt the familiar surge of power between his thighs, the vibration traveling up through his spine. Behind him, Gage, Dutch, and Knox fell into formation, a tight V that cut through the parking lot and onto the highway beyond. The sun hung low on the horizon, bleeding red and gold across the sky. Long shadows stretched across the asphalt as they accelerated, the speedometer climbing past 60, 70, 80. Wind tore at Jeremy's jacket, whipped his hair back from his face, carried away everything except the singular focus of forward motion. This was what the club was built for. Not the parties or the reputation or the brotherhood, though those mattered. This, the moment when civilized pretense fell away and men became what they were always meant to be, a pack, moving as one, hunting. They passed through small towns that barely registered. Gas stations and shuttered storefronts, places where people lived quiet lives and never understood what it meant to ride toward violence with purpose. The hounds were ghosts on this road, already committed to a world those people would never see. Jeremy's phone buzzed against his chest. He slowed slightly, pulled it from his inside pocket. Frank's name on the screen. He gestured to the others, and they eased off the throttle, engines dropping to a low rumble as he answered. "Talk to me." Frank's voice crackled through the speaker. Snake Tattoo and his buddy came back, looked around the back lot, asked more questions. I stuck to the story, but they're not buying it completely. They called someone. Silas, I'm guessing. He told them to stay put and wait. How long? They're getting restless. 20 minutes, maybe 30, before they push harder or Silas shows up himself. A pause. You need to move fast, Alpha. We're 10 minutes out. Good hunting. The line went dead. Jeremy pocketed the phone, met Gage's eyes. No words necessary. The urgency was written in the tightening of his second's jaw, the way Dutch's massive hands flexed on his handlebars. They'd heard enough. The throttles opened wide. The bikes screamed into the growing darkness. The quarry house materialized from the landscape like something conjured from nightmare. A squat, weather-beaten structure that had probably been a foreman's office decades ago, now repurposed for darker work. Rust stained the corrugated metal roof. Plywood covered several windows. The surrounding land was overgrown scrub and industrial decay, the kind of place where screams wouldn't carry and bodies could disappear into abandoned mine shafts. They'd killed their headlights a mile back, rolling the last stretch on momentum and starlight. Now the bikes were hidden in a copse of dead trees, invisible from the road. The hounds moved through the darkness on foot, weapons drawn, every sense heightened. Jeremy pulled Winter's crude map from his pocket, studied it in the faint moonlight. 2 guards outside, she'd been right. He could see their cigarette embers glowing near the front entrance, hear the low murmur of conversation. Lazy, confident. Men who'd never expected real resistance. That confidence was about to cost them everything. Gage moved left without being told, circling wide through the overgrown grass. Dutch went right, his bulk somehow silent despite his size. Knox stayed with Jeremy, covering the direct approach. They'd done this dance before. Different targets, different reasons, but the choreography was muscle memory. The first guard never saw Gage coming. One moment he was laughing at something his partner said. The next, a leather-clad arm snaked around his throat, cutting off sound and air. He thrashed once, twice, then went limp. Gage lowered him to the ground with almost gentle care. The second guard turned at the sudden silence, hand moving toward his weapon, and met Dutch's fist instead. The impact sounded like a sledgehammer hitting meat. The guard crumpled, unconscious before he hit the dirt. 4 seconds. Clean, efficient, professional. Jeremy and Knox emerged from the shadows, stepping over the fallen guards. Jeremy pressed his ear to the weathered front door, listening. Voices inside, at least 3, maybe 4. Deeper in the house, something that might have been crying. His heart clenched. Sky. He tested the doorknob. Locked, but the mechanism felt cheap, worn. Dutch appeared beside him, produced a small pry bar from inside his jacket. The lock gave with barely a whisper of protest. Jeremy drew his knife. 8 inches of blackened steel his father had carried in Vietnam. The handle wrapped in cracked leather that bore the sweat stains of 2 generations. Guns were faster, louder, messier. A knife was personal, intimate. The kind of tool you used when you wanted someone to understand exactly how serious you were about killing them. The door swung open on hinges that needed oil, but didn't quite scream. The front room was exactly as Winter had described. Sparse furniture, weapons on a central table, the smell of stale beer and unwashed bodies. A single lamp cast harsh shadows across walls that had probably seen too much suffering. 2 men sat at the table playing cards, backs to the door. Amateurs. The kind of hired muscle that thought violence made them dangerous. Never understanding that real predators were the ones who could sit in absolute stillness and wait. A 3rd man emerged from what looked like the kitchen, beer in hand, and froze when he saw Jeremy. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened to shout a warning. Knox's throwing knife took him in the throat before any sound emerged. The beer bottle shattered on the floor. The man gurgled once, clutched uselessly at the blade, and collapsed. The card players spun around, hands scrambling for weapons. Too slow. Always too slow. Gage and Dutch were already moving, closing the distance before fingers found triggers. The room erupted into controlled chaos. Grunts of effort. The meaty impacts of fists on flesh. A chair splintering under someone's weight. Jeremy didn't join them. His eyes were fixed on the door in the back corner, the one that, according to Winter's map, led to the basement stairs. He crossed the room in 4 strides, boots crunching over broken glass. Behind him, the sounds of combat were already fading. One final wet gasp, then silence. The hounds knew their work. His hand closed around the basement doorknob. The simple deadbolt Winter had described was already thrown open, hanging loose. Someone had been down there recently. Jeremy opened the door. Stairs descended into darkness, the kind of absolute black that existed underground, away from moon and stars. The smell hit him immediately. Damp stone, mildew, and underneath it something sharper. Fear, sweat, blood, the particular stench of captivity. From below, a voice, young, terrified, defiant despite everything. Stay the fuck away from me. Not Sky's voice. Different cadence, different accent, but the same desperate courage Winter had shown when she'd bolted into traffic rather than submit. Another girl. Another victim in the collector's pipeline. Jeremy's grip tightened on his knife. Somewhere in this house was his target. The man who'd orchestrated his sister's destruction, who'd built an empire on suffering, who thought young women were commodities to be broken and sold. Behind him, Gage appeared in the doorway, blood on his knuckles, eyes cold and clear. Ground floor's clear. 3 down. Neutralized. Basement, Jeremy said quietly, gesturing to the open door. Dutch and Knox materialized from the shadows, weapons ready. The 4 hounds stood at the threshold, poised between the world of laws and the world they were about to enter. A place where justice wore brass knuckles and answered to no court but its own conscience. From somewhere deeper in the house, the second floor maybe, or a hidden room Winter hadn't known about, came the sound of movement, heavy footsteps, a door opening, a man's voice, rough with authority and barely restrained violence. What the hell is going on down there? Jeremy's blood went cold, then hot, then cold again. He knew that voice, had heard it on surveillance recordings, in testimonies from girls who'd escaped, in his own nightmares since Melissa's funeral. The collector, not Silas, not some lieutenant or enforcer. The man himself, here, now. Jeremy looked at his brothers, saw the same recognition in their eyes, the same predatory stillness that came before lethal violence. This was it, the reason they'd ridden through the dying light, the mission that would define who they were and what the Iron Hounds stood for. He raised his knife, felt its familiar weight, felt the ghost of his father's hand guiding his own. "Let's go hunting," he said softly, and started up the stairs toward the voice, toward the violence, toward the reckoning that had been 20 years in the making. Behind him, the hounds followed. Above them, the collector waited. Between them, somewhere in this house of horrors, a girl named Sky was about to learn that the Alpha was coming, and that some debts could only be paid in blood. What did you think of Jeremy's war council and Winter's transformation into the intelligence officer? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear which moment hit hardest for you. If you're hooked on this story, don't miss what happens next. The rescue is just beginning.